Well, good afternoon, everybody. So I appreciate the opportunity just to say welcome. It's really a very successful program, and for me, it's a great opportunity for me to come out and publicly thank Kim for all the work she's done. Kim, thank you very much for everything you've done with this. And again, Amy, you've been involved also. And again, we appreciate the fact that we had a concept, and you two have actually put walls around that concept, and that's really what's important. It's nice to have gone through a year of this and watch the participation of the members and see the growth that's gone on. And what we actually hope will happen is that what you've learned and bringing in new people, that we will continue to grow and learn how we take what I call a non-traditional profession and make sure we meet needs and we continue to become a better organization. And I think we're a better organization when we have all the principles involved in all aspects of this organization. So long term, we expect to see a number of you sitting in those chairs down there on the 5th floor at the Reeves Center, making decisions and helping leading us forward. I also wanted to thank our guest speakers that are here today. We have a new title for them. They're called Doctor. But we are actually excited you're here and I'm looking forward to what you're sharing also. So again, I get to do the opening welcome. We have an extra Gregory in the house. Didn't want you to be left out, bro. But we just wanted to just say welcome. Glad you're here and glad you are interested in moving not only your career forward, but interested in moving the department forward. So again, thank you. Look forward to this next year of hard work, and we'll get back together.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is a great turnout, so very excited about that. And thanks to Dr. Janke and her team, not only for your presentation today, but for the work you did with our recruit class earlier. So today, according to Twitter, is the Day of the Girl, which Kim and I did not know that when we organized this, but obviously seems appropriate. So hashtag Day of the Girl, and that's how the department is appropriately celebrating this day. It's been an interesting couple of weeks nationally for women, hasn't it? And I say interesting. Chief Dean's getting nervous, but for me, for me personally, it's actually it's been a little stressful. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing it this way, but I've been wondering on a personal level, thinking about the value of women in our society and how our society values women. Women's voices, women's perspective, that's the national debate right now, right in this city. And I don't know how that debate is going to end up in the short term and the long term nationally, but I can tell you that in this department, we absolutely value women. We value all of you, your voices, and your perspectives. And that's what this program and that's what this initiative is all about, is valuing that. So I agree with Chief Dean. Strong organizations are diverse organizations, and that's why we celebrate our diversity, and that's why we're supporting women and their growth in our organization. And so also, as we've got this challenging time nationally, I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes from Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African-American member of Congress. She said, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." So that's what we're doing, and I want to now come to the point in the program where we congratulate all of the women who have been promoted recently within our department, bringing their folding chair to the table. And so I'm going to take a couple of minutes to recognize all of you. Starting with our first female battalion fire chief in many years, Queen Anune. Who couldn't be here today, but we're all very proud of her and her work. Also Captain Kishia Clemencia, who is here, and is also on our battalion fire chief list. So congratulations. We've got Lieutenant Paramedic Shauna Bailey here. Lieutenant Kishia Jackson. Sergeant Benita Bowman. Sergeant Paramedic Kiana Lofton. I think Sergeant Jackie Cole was back in 2016, if I remember correctly. We have in Fire Inspector Shalonda Smith, Jessica Bullock, and Tanya Justin. And of course, Lieutenant Ola Vafumi, who I saved for last because she's also number 3 on our recently published captain's list. I also want to note that, of course, we never know exactly how many people will get promoted in an upcoming cycle, but I wanted to recognize that Karen Brown was the highest ranked woman on the sergeant's list at number 3. We did promote 59 sergeants in the last cycle, and Wendy Pinkney is number 45. And then Rashonda Mason, our highest ranking female on the lieutenant's list at number 27. I was also reminded that we do have some great female technicians out there who we don't want to forget, who play an important role in our organization. So congratulations to all of you. And thanks for coming. And now Kim is going to introduce our speaker.
So thanks, Amy, and thanks, Chief Dean, for your welcoming. So Sarah Janke, she is the Director of the Center for Fire Rescue and EMS Health Research at the National Development and Research Institute. Dr. Janke has served as the principal investigator of several large-scale studies of the health and readiness of the U.S. Fire Service, funded by the Department of Homeland Security, the National Institutes of Health, and the American Heart Association, with a national sample of fire service representatives from the American Heart Association. Current projects for Dr. Janke include studies focused on evaluating the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, Stress First Aid Program, the health of women in the fire service, workplace violence, exposure assessments on the fire ground, and randomized controlled trials of wellness interventions. She serves as a co-investigator of several other studies focused on fitness, nutrition, and health behaviors in both firefighters and military populations. Dr. Janke regularly serves as a consultant to several fire service organizations, including the National Volunteer Fire Council and the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. In addition, she provides a monthly column for Rescue One focused on interpreting research. She grew up around the fire service as her dad retired as chief of the Overland Park Fire Department in Kansas City suburbs. And it was his dedication to the fire service and improving fire safety that inspired Dr. Janke to focus on the health and well-being of firefighters in her own career. Dr. Janke is currently heading up research and development to understand the health and how it affects female firefighters. And that is why I wanted her to come and speak to us today. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Janke. There you are. Thank you.
It would have been really funny if I had left. And so when you were looking for me, I wasn't there. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for being here to listen. I'm honored, and I think this is an amazing opportunity to talk to you and share some of the work that we've been doing. So the title, is it even worth studying women? I mean, like, Spoiler alert, yeah, it is. But I put that as a title because that was actually a question that was raised at the last National Research Agenda Setting meeting for the fire service. Right? I know. So the fallen firefighters put together their research agenda every year, or I guess it's like every 5 years, we update it. And so the last round, I was asked to come help facilitate a section on health and wellness, and we got to the point, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. We got to the point where we were doing the report out from what our group was. And our section had a lot of discussion around, we need to make sure we're understanding the health impacts on everyone. So we do know, so if you look at the history of firefighter health research, it's been going on not as long as you would think. I was talking to Billy Goldfeder one time, and he said, he goes, most of the research, we've done more research in the last decade than 100 years before that on firefighter health. And if you've ever met Billy or heard him speak, sometimes he just makes stuff up. And so I thought maybe that was just a number, that he was just saying that. But so I went and I looked in PubMed, and we actually were able to track it. So this is when you put firefighter health the keyword firefighter in PubMed, which is where all the published medical literature is. You actually saw that 68.5% of it has occurred in about the last decade. Largely because FEMA started funding it, so there was an area where you could go for funding for this, and then with all the research is not put out by FEMA-funded researchers, but almost every publication now that cites firefighter health research cites one of the FEMA-funded researchers. So it's really kind of sparked this interest in firefighter health, which is awesome. And the first agenda setting meeting was pretty basic in what they asked for, like research on cardiovascular disease. There was some focus on cancer the first time around, but not that much. And looking at the physiological effects of firefighting. So we come together to reset the agenda. And as we're up there and we're talking, and I was co-presenting with Pat Morrison, and we're we really think there needs to be, our group consensus was that there needs to be an understanding of the impact of health of different groups, specifically women, people that are ethnic or racial minorities. And someone stood up in the back of the room, and I'm glad he did in hindsight. But he goes, if there's a limited pot of money, is it even worth studying women if they're such a small percent of the population? And when I calmed down and I quit shaking, Pat handed me and I'm glad he asked, because I think a lot of people in the room were asking that same question. Should we even study this group? And you do look at, I thought I had a different slide next. You do look at the data that's out there, and almost all of the data that's been published in the last 10 years is on Caucasian males, because that's the largest group that we could study, and that's the group that was the low-hanging fruit, right? And so we know quite a bit about how being a firefighter affects Caucasian males, which is awesome, and it has implications for women, but there are also things that we don't know, and I think a lot of the recruitment and retention issues that we're having, trying to have a more diverse workforce, is because there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot we don't know about pregnancy. There's a lot we don't know about breastfeeding. There's a lot and I need to talk to you after this. But there's a lot that we don't know, and it also speaks to the culture of, if you have an organization and a fire service that says, well, we're not going to study anyone that's not, a Caucasian male, that also sends a message, right? So with diversity, we have to embrace diversity and also understand that we then have a responsibility to everyone that's in that workforce. And my example to the kind gentleman in the back of the room, I said, if you get testicular cancer, I wish we weren't recording this, if you get testicular cancer, we've got great data on that. We know what exposures you're exposed to on the fire ground. We know the pathways of that, the endocrine disrupting chemicals that you're exposed to. Most states recognize that as a presumptive cancer, and you can get coverage for it. And if you get turned down the first time, which almost everyone is, you can go back in. We have this data that we can give you that, Doug Daniels' study said this, Grace LeMaster's study said this. If you're a woman who has breast cancer, and we're looking for the data for that, it's just not out there. I mean, for that woman who's going for presumptive coverage, which, shocker, the mechanism for reproductive cancers are similar regardless of gender, but there's different reproductive concerns. that data, I was like, I told him, I said, if you're that woman who's going for coverage for her breast cancer, that we are pretty certain is occupationally related because of low risk factors on every other issue across the spectrum, like this data is already 10 years too late. Like the time has come and gone, and we already needed it. It's too late. So I calmed down, he calmed down. It ended up, everyone's like, you did a good job not yelling. But I think it was, the fact that it was raised was good, but I think the fact that it raised the awareness of a lot of people in the room, because yes, the answer is, it is worth studying the health of everyone in the fire service. And I understand why why we started with Caucasian males, because that's who it was the most easy to access. You know, that was the low-hanging fruit, and we got great data from that, but now we need to move on, and we need to keep looking at other groups. So at the end of this, I'll update you on what projects are currently funded and working on increasing women in the fire service. So we know from the research, the MMWR data from 2000, I think this is 2006, cardiovascular disease, leading cause of line of duty deaths or on-duty deaths. There's debate about how we should word that, but among firefighters. So we know also that for every line of duty or on-duty cardiac event, there are about 17 that occur that are non-fatal. So we know that about from the registry data, and pretty consistent. There haven't been a lot of cardiovascular female deaths, but just because of the low rate. So, but if you look at the cardiovascular risk factors, a lot of that's similar across, and the cardiovascular occupational risks are similar across genders. There's been a lot of focus on everything that goes into that around the fire service. So bad news, firefighting in general, being in the fire service in general, is going to be bad for your health, kind of across the board. Everything from exposures and the physical workload, but also looking at things like shift work and the implications of interrupted circadian rhythms, of not getting a good night's sleep for 25 years, whether you're on or off duty, like that has some serious health implications. So we know kind of this has been kind of one of the big bodies of research that's been going on. The other one is looking at firefighters and cancers. So I could give you a very long and boring explanation for why we don't have a consistent number of exactly what cancers are related to firefighting. But all of these cancers in one of the studies that is out there has been related to firefighting. You'll notice the very bottom of the list, there was a study out of Florida that breast cancer was found to be increased, but it was among men. So it would be logical to assume that it would also be elevated in women, but most of the studies just don't have a large enough sample size yet. So you see these huge odds ratios, but just not enough. It's not statistically significant because there are not enough women in the study. So we're working on that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But so what happened to all the women, and why haven't we been studying them before? I said, you know, the Caucasian males are low-hanging fruit, and I don't mean that in a mean way, but they're an easy group to access, right? So we had our first couple of studies, our first couple of FEMA studies. One was a cohort study where we were in the Missouri Valley region, so like Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Colorado, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, like really exciting places to visit and do data collection in, especially in the winter time. We were there, and we spent a lot of time with those departments, and our sample of women was about the same as it was in the general fire service population, which is about 5 to 7.5%. We had a second follow-up study where we did a national study. It was Maine to Guam, 20 departments, half had implemented the Wellness Fitness Initiative, half hadn't. And even in those studies, we had a very small sample size of women. So it's a difficult group to access in terms of, there are iWomen, we've worked with iWomen, and that's been fantastic, but not every, I don't know if everyone in this room that is a female is a member of iWomen, and males can be members of iWomen to support diversity, but not every female in the country is a member of that organization. And there's not like a list of all the firefighters across the country. So it's a difficult group to access, small sample size, difficult to secure funding for. We currently have funding, or we just finished a project by National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and then FEMA has funded, which I think is largely because of the push that has occurred on the importance of studying everyone in the fire service. And it makes for expensive and costly studies. And if you look at women in the fire service, we know, looking at other groups, 13% of law enforcement are women. 14% of the military, 6% of the Marine Corps, where everyone is expected to be combat ready, is women. But only 3.5 to 5% on fire and emergency services. It's really low, right? It's really low. And it's lower than, I mean, I knew it was low, and then when I realized it was lower than the Marine Corps, I was like, wow, what is the fire service doing that is uniquely, discriminating against women or not encouraging women to join? And so that's one of the things. And it's been a fascinating process learning about that. We've done a couple studies that are qualitative and then some quantitative data collection on this stuff. But it makes it a difficult group to study. I mentioned those first 2 cohort studies that we had. And we pulled both studies, pulled out all the assessments we had for them and tried to publish them, because every time we would publish a paper, like we would turn in this beautifully done, in the world of scientific nerds, they were beautifully done studies. Chris is nodding. Oh, I should have introduced Chris and Brittany are back there. They're from our team in Kansas City. You'll see their name on new publications as they come out. They just joined our team. But when we would publish these beautifully done cohort studies, they would say, well, you're looking at cardiovascular risk factors, take the women in the sample out because the sample's not large enough to do statistical comparisons. So it's not really a benefit from the editor's perspective. And it's not, that's relatively a standard response typically. But our issue was then we were contributing to the problem where we were publishing, we had 15 articles out on males in the fire service. So we did pull all the data we had and put it into an article that I'm very proud of and finally got it published, but it took 5 different publishers before we found someone who was willing to publish it because of the small sample size. But what we found, I thought was really interesting stuff. And I can say, since we started looking at this area and looking at women specifically in the fire service, I'm forever amazed at the strength and resilience of women who choose this as a career and are able to stay with it. It's amazing, and get promoted through it. I mean, I've spent a lot of time sitting around and doing interviews and focus groups, and I always leave just overwhelmed with, it's incredibly impressive. So congratulations to everyone who has chosen this and is sticking with it. What we found is that women in the fire service, while we look at a lot of different health risk factors among males and have concerns about things like rates of obesity, women in the fire service, we weren't finding the same thing, actually lower rates of obesity than the general population, and really tended to be a pretty healthy group in terms of physical health. Worked really hard often to be healthy. I'll present some injury data and some other things like that, but we did see the only screening that we had across both was depression, and we did see rates of depression in the range of concern for depression a little bit higher than we did in the male population, but for reasons that I don't want to give away the punchline, but I highlight those in the presentation too. So we started with this NHLBI study. We did a qualitative, we did interviews, focus groups, and we talked to folks who were in leadership positions and at all the organizations. So we had IFC, IFF, NBFC, all the initial organizations had someone talk to us. And then we talked to women who left prior to retirement. One of the interesting things is the rate of men leaving the fire service prior to retirement age, or typical retirement age, is relatively low, but a lot of times that wasn't the case with women. A lot reported women leaving before they would have reached retirement age. And then also talk to people males in leadership positions, which was really interesting because a lot of times these folks who were very thoughtful, very progressive about health issues and, really doing the right thing for the folks that work for them, often I would ask a question, our standard questions about women and health or pregnancy, and they would go, I don't know, I've never thought of that before. Which I thought was really telling, because these are the thought leaders, and some people would say well, I'm probably not the one that you should be asking that question to. And my response was, you hold a position at a national organization leading health and wellness in the fire service. The fact that you haven't thought about that is a finding, but you're exactly who I should be talking to, and that is the finding, is that you haven't thought about it. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, they have the best intentions. It's just something. So that's another thing that I think my point with the research is we need to be aware of what the questions are. We need to know what we need to ask. And then we did a quantitative general health survey. And I'll share some of the findings from that, but we did just a broad cross-section of questions related to health. When we looked at type of injury, we found that was looked way bigger when I had it on my little, sorry, the printing is a little bit small. We found that the types of injuries that women had was pretty similar to what the data we published off of data on men in the fire service. So those superficial dislocations, strains, and sprains were the most common, which is pretty typical of what you find in all the literature on firefighter health. And the duty being performed when injured was pretty standard too. Training actually accounts for a lot of the injuries, whether it's fire and EMS duties or physical training. Those are the two biggies all across the board. And when we talk to folks and talk to women about injury, this is one of my favorite quotes, but I think it only tells half the story because absolutely true. Fire doesn't discriminate. Like, it will kill you either way. It does not care if you have, ovaries or it doesn't matter. But what we did find that was interesting in the qualitative work we did was that fire doesn't discriminate, but people definitely can. And that's what a lot of the women were experiencing. And the risk was not fighting fire, and often the women had no concern about fighting the fire. It was the situation with the folks that they were in with. And sometimes, like, horrific stories of women purposely being put into danger to see if they could handle it. Women who had called for a second truck, and the second truck showed up and just sat and watched because they were trying to make a point. So yeah, fire absolutely does not discriminate, but people can, and there's a big part of being the fire service. And the other thing that was interesting about this, though, was the kind of polar opposites. And one of the things that I thought was fantastic about the focus groups, we did a lot with women who had really struggled, but then there were a couple departments that we went to where the chief said, come in and talk to the women that work for me. I don't know, but I think this. And when we went in and talked to them, there were women who didn't believe, they didn't understand why we were asking the questions. They're like, we're just part of this department. Like, we're accepted, we're validated, we're just part of this department. I don't know that is there really an issue? And I'm like, let me tell you about the woman I talked to yesterday from another department. And they were flabbergasted. They're like, that still happens? And so I think part of the lesson is you can change the culture. You can change the expectations. You can change the norms. And you can have an inclusive environment. It's not easy. It's not an overnight process. But there are departments out there that have integrated women in, and that they are just part of the team, which is, I think, what we want to see everywhere. When we asked about injuries, a lot of the discussion around, like, you're just built different. And so sometimes you have to train different than the men might have to. And I think that's why we saw, when we ask, when we measure fitness and talk to fitness, you're kind of all across the board a lot often with men in terms of what they do. But the women tend to be pretty active and pretty on top of things. So a lot of discussion around training needs and how if we always have to do it, carry everything this way because that's how we've always done it. Not always the most beneficial not always the most beneficial approach for women, because sometimes you have to do it a little bit differently. Interestingly, though, when we were talking to a couple of the focus groups, these women were saying, I said, can't we carry the ladder this way? Like, it makes more sense. It works better for me, and we still get the ladder where it needs to go. Is that okay? And captains, company officers, they're like, okay, yeah, I guess that does make sense, and probably would be a better way for maybe everyone. And I had so many women say, you would be shocked at the number of times after those trainings that, like, a smaller stature guy will, like, come up to me when no one else is looking and be like, so show me how you did that. So speaking to the choir, it sounds like that's familiar. But it's interesting because, not everyone is a 6 foot tall male. Even males, there's a lot of variation in terms of size and what they can and can't do. So, interesting. Other questions that we had, a lot of women still, and I don't know what your situation is here with gear, but we had a lot of women that had some pretty significant concerns about PPE and them not fitting. And I know there's been a lot of efforts. I've tried on some of the gear for women. Which is interesting. Some of it I've looked at and I tried it on and I'm like, it's not like a fashion statement. Why is it cropped so funny? But at least we're working on it, right? There's progress. But issues around PPE and things that just didn't fit. Similar, again, to there were males, and that's what we heard with the focus groups is, that there were men that were like, actually that doesn't fit me either. And then the lifting techniques, like I mentioned. So kind of you got to do it a little bit different. Another thing that came out though around injury, and this is where like fire doesn't discriminate, but people can. A lot of times women talked about, I just feel like I have to present like nothing is gonna hurt me, because if I'm hurt, it's because I'm a woman, not because something happened that just hurt me, right? And so one of the things that we saw was kind of a long-term, and we're trying to quantify this now in our current study, but it's a difficult thing to do, but chronic injuries. So whereas an average firefighter would have reported an injury, rehabbed it, there have been instances where women talk about, I don't want to admit that I got hurt because I don't want to appear weak, and so I didn't rehab it, and now I have a chronic back injury that probably someone else in my situation wouldn't have addressed. So it was kind of an interesting thing. We're trying to quantify the chronic back injury and how that relates. But then also harassment, and we have some data now on harassment and women's experiences with that. But there are, definitely, and I'm sure it would never happen here, but there are instances where women still are put in harm's way to prove a point. So, like I said, not here, but other places that are not anywhere near DC. When we looked at experiences of discrimination and harassment, so Women had done a study, the Hewlett report was 2008. I actually bring Chris and Brittany with me to both carry my bags and to tell me where to be and to fill me in on numbers that I can't remember. So it's fantastic. So 2008, they put out a report, and so we asked the same types of questions. And in a lot of ways, I first looked at this report when I put them side by side, and I'm like, when I give this with the caveat of like, we used a different sampling technique, we did, so it's a little bit different. They are not directly comparable in a scientific sense, but the numbers are lower in most of these things. I'm like, wow, that's 10 percentage points fewer that reported shunning and isolation. That is, almost across the board, the numbers have gone down. And then I was sitting with one of my colleagues and I was telling him, like, most of these numbers have gone down. And he's like, Carlos goes, Sarah, but look at how high the numbers still are. And I was like, oh, yeah, a third of people are still dealing with sexual advances, or, feel like they are being hazed, is 16%. So yes, I think it's fantastic that only 5.2% of people reported being assaulted, as opposed to 6.3, but 5.2 is still not a good number that we should be proud of. We're headed in the right direction, but this is, I had said originally, like, well, this is kind of a good news, bad news slide. And then I was like, actually, it's kind of like a worse news, a little bit not as worse news. So, and we found that kind of across, again, I apologize. I can share the presentation if anyone wants to see the exact numbers. And I didn't bring handouts because I have a couple different studies that I can just share everything via email. There's just a lot. And I think all of this scientific data is fascinating, but everyone else might not. So, and similar with the discrimination and harassment questions. So awesome that we believe that only 22% of women said that their promotions were decided in an unfair way, as opposed to 33%, but that's still a quarter. It's still a pretty significant number. And we looked at what's the impact of this. And so we looked in the data at people who reported high levels, medium levels, and low levels of discrimination and harassment. And what we found, which is even harder to read than I thought. I really should have put this up on a projector to check it before I came here. But what we found is that physical health and mental health was directly related to discrimination and harassment. So for the folks who had, if we look at the percent, like down on the mental health section, you look at things like people in the range of concern for depression. Folks that are women who are at the low end of that, who really didn't report a lot of discrimination or harassment, 15% were in the range of concern, which is about the same as what you see for males in the fire service. So when I reported earlier that the rates were a little bit higher for women, actually for women who are supported, that's not the case. For the women who are supported, they're pretty much the same as males. But you see kind of a linear relationship where the women who reported high rates of discrimination, harassment, or experiences of that, almost half of them were in the range of concern for depression. If you look at anxiety, similar pattern. You see if the people at the low end, about the same as males. I mean, firefighting and being in the fire service is a stressful job. You respond to everyone's worst day. There is going to be a mental health impact of that. It just is what it is. But if you look at that and you consider that in a supportive environment, there's not a difference, but in an environment with discrimination, harassment, you do see a difference. So that is where we're seeing the difference, probably. And when you look at their behaviors, we do know, we talk about alcohol in the fire service, and it's high. I've had people tell me, like, oh, I don't think we drink much more than other occupations. The data would suggest otherwise, significantly more, which I am not complaining, because you're not going to have any more fun than you have at a fire department party. But what we know is, if you look at things like being in the range of concern for alcohol-related behaviors, linear relationship again. Women who are discriminated against or feel like they're harassed are significantly more likely to have issues with alcohol use. And so another area that we've looked at, and this has some interesting implications too for men, is reproductive health of women. So we just published and looked at rates of miscarriage and stillbirth, and we actually found, or preterm labor, preterm labor, and found that both of those things were higher among women in the fire service than the general population, which makes sense. When I talk to reproductive epidemiologists, they're like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. There's the stress on the body, and there's the, working a stressful job. And there's a huge range in terms of how departments respond to a pregnant woman. And the one consistent theme we had from all of this stuff was, you don't want to be the first pregnant woman at a department that has to set the policy. So there's a huge range of how it's responded to. It's a huge range of how it's managed. We did find higher rates of miscarriage. We have our current survey, we have a lot more detailed questions about this, so we'll be able to know a little bit more about the mechanism. But this is just kind of broad stroke, was high rates. We did find that there are a lot of departments that don't have any policies related to pregnancy or maternity leave. And I just naively asked the question, does your department have a policy? And what we found is that this next time around, we need to ask detailed questions about what that policy is. You may have seen these studies coming out of, or these articles coming out of Florida, where this woman was required to stay on the truck until the day before she delivered, because they have a policy that if you have an injury that's not work-related, you can't be off the job for that unless you take all your sick time. So they have a policy, but the policy was you can't be off. So it's interesting. And I think juxtaposed with what we just published on preterm labor and miscarriage, I think probably that will do something to shape this, so this type of thing doesn't happen again. And we also have a study, so we looked at on average, most women reported at the end of their first trimester to the department that they were pregnant, although there was a lot of debate and lively debate in some of our focus groups about that. And most didn't restrict duties till first or second trimester. One of the challenges with that is the important, the key time for teratogens is that first trimester. So it's that first 12 weeks. But, do you go light duty then? What about departments that don't have light duty? And then there were women, I talked to one woman she was like, I fought a 3-alarm fire the day before I delivered, and I wanted to, and I would not have gotten off the truck for anything. And it was the only time we almost had an actual fight at a focus group, because there was another woman that was like, the minute I found out I was pregnant. But then also practical reasons, right? There was one woman in our focus groups who, she was on 24s, her husband was on 24s, they were opposite, so they had childcare taken care of. And she's like, I can't go to a 40-hour week, from 9 to 5. What are we gonna do for childcare? So it's and 10% reported they didn't restrict their duties at all, which sounds awful to me, having been pregnant, but it is what it is. But part of the problem, I think, again, if we don't have any data on it, we don't know if there are risks. So we need to research that. We also have done, Jeff Burgess down in Arizona did this as a pilot study, and so we're repeating it with our current studies, re-looking at this with breastfeeding, because the question is, how long do you need to pump and dump after a fire? And so his preliminary data suggested 72 hours, which, as a recently breastfeeding mom, that's a long time to pump and dump. And I also appreciate that I don't have to explain what that is, because when I was doing this presentation at a research symposium, everyone's like, did you just say pump and dump? And I'm like, it's a thing. Like, it's just a thing. You pump and then you throw the milk away. And they were all like, I'm like, oh. So I'm about to say the word semen too, because with reproductive health concern, well, no, follow me on this. This is another reason that this kind of research is important and why we should study women. So we know Jeff was able to quantify, carcinogens in the breast milk. So what are the other implications for that? Like, are there epigenetic changes for other things? And actually, we're working on putting together a study. I think this just got way more interesting to the gentleman in the back of the room, but we're working on this other study because there is evidence in other occupational groups to suggest that there are reproductive outcomes that are affected by the things that firefighters are exposed to. Everything from shift work to exposures on the fire ground. And so one of the things we're proposing with NIOSH is to study semen and look at people who have not been exposed to fires and then after they have, because we believe that they could be related to things like attention deficit disorder, Asperger's, child outcomes, even for males. Interesting, right? Yeah, so the answer to the original question, should we be studying women? Yes, I think so. So what we have going on now is a 2-year prospective cohort study. So we tried to recruit as many women as we could find through, like Billy sent it on the secret list. We worked with IFF. You might, if you've taken a long and cumbersome survey via the internet in the last year, thank you. I apologize for all the questions. We just had so many. The cool thing was trying to recruit people to take long and cumbersome surveys is difficult. We had 4,000 women respond to that survey. That's a lot. And almost everyone completed it all the way through the end, which is also a feat in and of itself. And you way earned your $10 gift card. What we asked in that, general health questions, questions about discrimination, harassment, safety concerns, injuries, cardiovascular disease, and reproductive health. So we are wading through the data. Chris and Brittany are wading through the data with me. And we had a great turnout on that. So we had career and volunteer in this one. You can see there that the average age, about late 30s to early 40s, years in fire service, a little bit different for career and volunteer, but relatively healthy group so far, I can tell you, but a great cross-section of folks at the fire service. What the articles we're looking at are things related to behavioral health, predictors of injury, similar, kind of repeating a lot of what we've done in males, but being able to look specifically with a quantitative focus on if things are different in females. We're going to do, like I said, delve into the miscarriage and then also wildland firefighters. We had about 780 women who are also wildland firefighters. So we'll be able to, isn't that awesome? As a researcher, so we sent out the request, send these out, everyone we could think of to send it out. And I had that moment of panic, what if no one responds to my survey? But immediately, surveys started pouring in, and 4,000 is an amazing number. We have a lot of folks on our current FEMA-funded study. It's been awesome to see all the organizations get involved, and so we're going to sit down with everyone next spring and do a stakeholder meeting, and then also some clinician stakeholders on this, because one of the issues a lot of people are asking, especially around miscarriage, most departments and most women say, well, the department said it's up to you and your physician to decide when you go off the truck. And you talk to a physician, and most OBs are they know nothing. If they've ever had a female patient that is a firefighter, it's rare. And so usually they don't know. So what is their question? Do you feel like you can? Well, technically you can, but should you? So hopefully with a little bit more clarity on that kind of stuff, we'll be able to direct some education for physicians too, and provide resources so if you go to a physician and you're pregnant, you can say, here's what we got. What do you think? Knowing this, what do you think? Should I be on the truck? So, cancer in the fire service. And I was just thinking, that's not my slide. This is not my slide. I'm actually presenting with Doug Daniels next week, and he's the one who did the big NIOSH study on cancer. And again, you won't be shocked to know that it's almost all in males, which is why we don't see a lot of the increases in females. It's just because it hasn't been studied, because it's a relatively small sample size. And these are actually his slides that he presents. He did look specifically at women and minority groups, but was not able to tell that much. So you see, there were 20,000 firefighters in the study. The problem with cancer is you're studying a rare case of something. And so you have to have just a ton of people, tons, I guess, technically, of people to be able to get an increased risk. So if you look at breast cancer in his sample, that the SIR of 1.45 means 45% more than the general population, but not statistically significant because there's not enough women in the study. So we are working on it, and then he also looked at minorities, and again, a lot of the same issues, but he had less than 1,000 women in that study, so it's the challenge. We have had some success and luck. I don't know if you heard this recently, the issue out of Texas where Carrie Stewart was getting sued for having breast cancer. Did you hear about this? So she got breast cancer. She fought for presumptive coverage. She got covered, or she didn't initially, which no one does initially, went to the state, presented all the empirical evidence, got coverage, came back, thought everything was fine, her treatments were paid for, and her city sued her. Right, because they said the Daniel study doesn't show an increased risk for breast cancer for women. So fortunately, we were able to put together a pretty good response. The city ended up, apparently, when you're on Good Morning America and ABC News and every news channel out there, the city gets a little bit, they back off. They're like, oh, we didn't realize we were suing you, which is what they told her. I think that was probably not true. But I'm just saying, I don't know. Because there is good evidence out there, it's just not in firefighter populations that we haven't proved yet. But there are a couple groups working on this. So San Francisco, some of the researchers out there, and then looking at the state of the evidence on the updated connection between breast cancer and the environment. That's all about things like benzene, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, all the things that we're talking about as being cancer causing in male firefighters and firefighters, because chemicals also don't discriminate. So we were able to, that second group, this was actually from Carrie's report, we argued in general firefighters are at increased risk, and that's a summary of basically all that we know about breast cancer in women. So, we're working on it. There's a lot of great data on the mechanism side that we can use until we have the great data on women. What research is going on now, San Francisco Fire Department is doing stuff, and then also there's a prospective cohort that I'm part of out of South Florida. Dr. Alberto Caban Martinez just took over the role in that, and they were focused on investigators, wildland firefighters, and this is actually fantastic. When they got the reviews back from FEMA, they said, what about women? And he's like, oh yeah, we'll collect women when we're out recruiting. If they're women, we will definitely encourage them to participate. And FEMA is like, we need to set up a phone call. So they said, I think Dr. Janke should be on the call with you because I'm on the project. And he was like, why do you think they want you on the call? And I'm like, because I study the health of women firefighters. So we get on this call and they're like, how are you going to specifically recruit women within these groups? And he went, well, if they're there, we're going to ask. And she goes, that's not sufficient anymore. She said, I don't want another 10 years from now to have a ton more, 10 years more of data on male firefighters. That just isn't going to do it anymore. Saying we'll recruit the ones that are there is just not sufficient, which is awesome. I later called and said, thanks for that. So there are efforts in this area. It's, to researchers, we feel like we're flying, like this is happening really fast, but for the fire service, if you're the woman who has breast cancer and is looking for coverage, well, one, I have a couple articles for you, but it's already too late if you're that woman. So that's it. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I will also put my email. The phone number is my cell phone, and I don't usually answer it the first time if I don't recognize the number, but leave me a message and I'll call you back or text me. And really proud of myself. I am on Twitter now. And there's actually some fun communication. There are a couple of groups, international groups, we just put in a manuscript together. We did a survey, an international survey of women in the fire service. So we've are all in there, but we'll tweet each other's stuff. I retweet. Chris I felt so old. We're on the plane and he's like, I'm like, Chris, how does this work? Like, how do I? And so he showed me how to retweet. I actually made my first meme, put it on there. Yeah. So, follow me on Twitter. Any questions?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
How do males and females within departments become a part of the study?
So it depends on the study. There's some where we look for departments. We do have for the okay. It depends on the study. For the one on breastfeeding, we're still looking for women who are breastfeeding to mail their breast milk to Arizona. So if you know any women who are breastfeeding or maybe breastfeeding in the future, I'm just saying if you are. We still need a handful of participants for that. A couple of our studies, we'll go to, right now we are looking for a couple of departments that would be interested in letting us work with their recruits to do the semen collection if that project gets funded. So it just kind of depends. The different research needs. We do have one, that one on child health, we are going to be looking for a few metro departments, so.
So is there an organization that you join to learn about these studies? Or
No.
how do you learn about them? So that people can.
Well, I would love for you guys to participate in my studies. So we basically it's connections with researchers. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I can totally hook you up.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you guys. What? Thanks for not taking.
Can you talk about the iWomen?
Yeah. So iWomen actually.
Try to encourage the women to join.
It's a fantastic organization, and even the leadership of that organization have said, they said we've kind of had a spotted past in terms of, people have felt like I don't want to be singled out as a female firefighter. I'm just a firefighter. But from stuff like we do work with them a lot to recruit people for participation in studies and also to disseminate what we have. So it's people are inundated with stuff. iWomen and via emails. iWomen does a good job of parsing out and only sending out the stuff on the research front that is important. So that is, and they say we in the past have been viewed as being. Well, you're just a bunch of angry women, and it's just not that anymore. They've worked really hard to, really kind of address everyone. But it's a great organization.
So they have an annual conference called the iWomen Conference. This past year, only Ola and I attended. I had sent information out to all of the women. Only Ola and I attended. And it is wonderful. I mean, the trainings, the leadership opportunities, the classes, it's really, really worthwhile.
And they're this year going to be in conjunction with FDIC.
Yes, yes, which is going to make it even better.
Yeah, yeah. Bobby Halton's been incredibly supportive of iWomen.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a member of
Any other questions? We're good? All right. Well, you have my email, phone number, and my Twitter if you'd like to tweet me any questions. I'd be happy to have Chris teach me how to respond. Awesome. Thank you.
So are there any questions for Dr. Janke? Please feel free to ask. A lot of interesting information. Any information that she passes on to me, I will make sure that I pass on to all of you as well. Dr. Janke, I want to thank you so much. I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about the focus group that you had this morning with the recruits. Did you want to mention that briefly?
That's a different study. We have a study going on around bullying and harassment in the fire service, so kind of in general. But we've been meeting with recruits. We had 2 on the East Coast, 2 in the Midwest, and 2 on the West Coast. So looking at how do you design trainings that are relevant, that are not kind of the standard HR, but responsive, because that joking and not harassment, but the joking around is part of the dark humor that makes, that's the buffer for a lot of behavioral health concerns. So it's a different, you can't just say don't joke and don't make eye contact with anyone. I mean, these are people that you live with. So it was a great group this morning. I really enjoyed it.
And you met with 2 recruit groups, correct?
Well, we really went long. I would have blamed Brittany, but we really went long, so we got half of the.
Got half of the recruits.
But it was awesome.
All right. So, But anyway, I want to thank all of you for coming, and certainly Dr. Janke and her staff for visiting us today. That was a great information, and hopefully more women will join the iWomen organization and basically come to the next iWomen conference. It's really, really great stuff. You get a lot of good information. All right, thanks to Chief Dean and Amy also, and thank you everybody for coming. Please take food.